Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Blue Oval Podcast. My name is Garrett Zatlin, and thank you for taking the time out of your day, out of your week, to join us, chat with us for an hour, and to kind of go over all of the NCAA cross-country news and analysis that is out there. Usually, if you're new to the podcast, I have a co-host. His name is Ben Weitzel. He's awesome. We love him most times. Unfortunately, on the podcast after the national meet, he's not here today. We did mention that in our last episode, so he will be back. He will have his hot takes, but he's unfortunately not here today. So for everyone who is listening, don't worry. I have a plan for today, but before I get into that, a few housekeeping items here. Apple and Spotify. We had a lot of great listens on our last podcast. No new reviews. We're stuck on Apple, the same number. Stuck on Spotify. If we could go there, 5-star ratings and reviews, that'd be awesome. Thank you. If you're on YouTube, welcome to the podcast on YouTube. Appreciate it. We had a nice little following there. Feel free to go subscribe on YouTube as well. Listen, like, smash the like button, whatever all those YouTubers say, right? So for today, we're going to be reviewing the NCAA Cross Country Championships, Division I. And with no Ben, I thought I'm going to try something a little bit different. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to open up and I'm going to talk about the key aspects, the main national title races on the men's and women's D1 side. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes. I usually say 20. It's usually 30. And then what we'll do is we'll transition. We're going to talk to Donny Spees. He was our D1 correspondent out at the national meet this year. He got some interviews, talked to a lot of great top names, was really in the mix, had some really nice insight. And then we'll also talk to longtime TSR veteran Mara Beatty. So she chatted with us for about 20-ish minutes or so today. So we'll be one big episode. It'll be a little bit of like a TSR group effort. And so hopefully it won't be too boring of me just speaking by myself. But I am going to have to do that right now. So let's get into it. And I think the place that we have to start is NC State and NAU on the women's side. So what happens is that coming into this Saturday's race at the NCAA Championships, it turns out that Kelsey Camille is injured and she can't race. And everyone must have thought that's the race. NAU has to win. That's what I thought. I didn't see a scenario where NC State was going to win without Kelsey Camille. Sure, did they have an avenue? Yes. It was a best case scenario, but it was slim. And then on top of that, what we would eventually learn later is that Caitlin Tuohy was ill. And not just like, she had a couple sniffles. She might have been very, very ill. So now we're on top of that. Sam Bush, a key name in the results later on, had struggled during the regular season. She slowly rallied during the postseason, but she was clearly not in top form. And Amaris Tenisima, the star Alabama transfer, was injured during the summer, was trying to come back, had 2 DNFs, had not finished a race before Saturday. And the rest of the lineup was inexperienced, most of it. Grace Hartman, Leah Stevens, Hannah Gapes, really inexperienced. And yet, despite all of that, NC State won the national title by a single point. I think we used the word miracle pretty lightly, pretty too much so. We overuse the word miracle in sports. Oh, it's a miracle that they won this game. It's a miracle play, blah, 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 blah. And outside of the divine intervention aspect of the word miracle, in a sports realm, I think has to be multiple caveats that are in the way of a team or in the way of an individual that they have to overcome. If you had told me, okay, Kelsey Camille's going to be out, but Tenisima's firing on all cylinders, Sam Bush is firing on all cylinders, I would have thought, okay, they could maybe still win. If you had told me, hey, Tuohy's actually going to be fully healthy, she's not ill, and, Tenisima has been finishing some of her races and she's been looking good, but Sam Bush has still had the same season, still inexperienced on the back end, I'd say, yeah, okay, I could still see that. But for NC State to have all of these different challenges, to go up against a Northern Arizona squad that went to the transfer portal, brought in All-American after All-American that looked stronger than we even expected. NC State had a top runner that was ill, had a top runner that was injured, had other two runners that needed to be at their best and had not showed any signs of doing so. Their back end was inexperienced. In fact, they didn't even have their fourth and fifth runners were outside of All-American contention. And yet they still won by a single point. I think that's pretty close to the sports version of the word miracle. I don't know how NC State did it. And you see the post-race reaction, and it's emotional. And I get it. I couldn't help but feel like, I see how this is maybe a moving moment. 3 national titles, your back's against the wall. No one thinks you have a shot with Camille gone. It's one of the most impressive performances I've ever seen in cross country, ever. I think the only other performance that I can think of was when North Penn, my high school Pennsylvania days, they beat O'Hara and Henderson, I think, Council Rock North, for the national title, or national state title, for the Pennsylvania state title in high school. They were not even in contention with the top 4, top 5, and they won the title that year. That was a massive upset. And it's not that NC State winning this was a massive upset, but what they had to overcome to win this title, to know that it was by 1 point, to do it with this kind of like last dance mentality of Tenisima's gone after this, Bush has gone after this, Camille's gone after this, Tuohy is probably or likely, actually, no, she definitely is. No, she has eligibility. She could come back. I would not believe that she is. I think the expectation is that she will leave. It's like a last dance kind of deal here. And I think that's what makes the moment a lot more special. Congratulations to the Wolfpack. Congratulations to Coach Lori Hennis. I mean, Lori Hennis has done... This is the win. This is the win where I go, it's time to start putting her in historical context, right? Sure, she may not have the number of national titles that, like, John McDonald does with Arkansas, right? But this streak of dominance is now an established dynasty. And it's done with a one of, if not the best distance runner in collegiate history. Maybe, depending on who you ask. She has been... Hennis, that is, Coach Hennis, she has been able to overcome every hurdle. She has perfectly molded, perfectly developed many, maybe not all, but many of the top recruits that she is given the responsibility of training. It's so impressive. It's so impressive. I don't even have words for it. I don't even have words for it. And here's the other thing. Northern Arizona should be pretty happy. I know they lost by 1 point. I know that must be heartbreaking. I know that must be tough to stomach. But they still ran really well. Graceland Larkin, 13th place. And Nico Rice, 15th place. Elise Stearns didn't have her best day, 20th place, right? Then there's the gap. And this is kind of where you could say maybe the race was had. It doesn't really matter. It's any one runner could have made all the difference. It's a single point, right? It's not like you can point to anything and just say, oh, well, that was the reason why they won or lost. It's a 1 point. Anything could happen in those results. Ruby Smee, 54th. Allie Upshaw, 57th. Maggie Congdon in 60th. Smee and Upshaw probably could have been in the All-American conversation. I think Upshaw certainly could have. And sure, Stearns could have been better, but generally speaking, this is a great team race. It's a great team race. And I'll give Mike Smith in Northern Arizona some credit here. I mean, in any other year, like they're winning the national title in this scenario, you know. You look at what they did, they had developed internally Stearns, Rice, who else is the name I'm thinking of here? Maggie Congdon. The key names there that they've Kira Moore they had earlier in the year, she was internally developed. They internally developed and they did it over years and years and years. And they got to a peak and they said, we're good, but we need a little bit more oomph. We need a little bit more firepower. And New Mexico, James Franklin, Coach Joe Franklin. There we go. How to think about that? Coach Joe Franklin leaves New Mexico, and the transfer portal opens up, and Northern Arizona is aggressive. They could have sat back. They could have been like, we're not going to invest. You know, like we're going to save some recruits. We're going to continue to develop internally a long-term picture. Got Larkin, got Maisie Grice, got Upshaw. They got Smee from University of San Francisco. They went all in. And the recruiting worked, the transfers worked. Like they were a top team. They saw the opportunity of going all in, being that saying that this is the year, and really going for it. And I can commend them for at least recognizing that and trying to capitalize on the opportunity. Again, 1 point. I mean, they're in any one runner goes up, falls down, whatever it is. I mean, the score switch. So, great season by Northern Arizona. They have a lot to be proud about. I know it was a tough loss, but it was maybe not the end of point total, but generally speaking, still a solid race, even if it wasn't their best. Individually, Parker Valby is just really good. I don't really have anything more to say about that. You know, with Tuohy clearly not at 100%, Valby was most certainly going to take this, and she did. It was pretty clear cut. Maybe you saw some of the gap being shortened up a little bit at the end, but frankly, it didn't matter. She was clearly the best runner in that field. If Tuohy's healthy and, you know, what does that, I think it's pretty clear cut. Valby was the best runner this season. I would argue that she had the toughest schedule of anyone, having to face Doris Limmengal and Hilda Olamumwe not once, not twice, but 3 times, going to SEC's South Regional Championships and then National Championships, beats them every time. Nutty Combe takes down Valby convincingly by 12 seconds, wins the national title. She was just the best. And while there may not be anything to analyze about the race, I think this win's important from a legacy standpoint. Whereas now the rivalry between Tuohy and Valby is a little bit more legitimate. Because we can say, like, oh, well, there's a rivalry, but the fact of the matter is that Tuohy was just the better runner, right? There was no other runner who's been on her tier, who's been on her plane over the past year. But then Valby gets that 5K title. Yes, Tuohy's not in that field, sure. And then Valby gets this cross-country title. And it's a bit more convincing. And she takes down Tuohy head-to-head. And now you're starting to say, like, okay, Tuohy, in the grand scheme of things, let's say she just goes pro tomorrow. And the collegiate rivalry ends there. Tuohy is still going to be considered maybe the greatest of all time. Maybe. At least top 3, I'd say. But I think at the end of the day, when you look back at it, Valby's always going to be in that discussion with her. Because we can talk about all the records that Tuohy's had, but Valby has now, I think, done enough to truly say, yeah, Tuohy was great, but there was really only one woman who could actually be competitive with her. And I think that's what this win does for her legacy. All right, moving on to the men's side, and it wasn't even close, and that's a surprising development here. So Oklahoma State, 49 points, Northern Arizona, 71. Hand up, I thought Northern Arizona would win. I did. And here's why I say that. So Oklahoma State had 5 men, in the top 15. I mean, at that point, there's nothing Northern Arizona could do. And the reason why I said Northern Arizona would win is because there was a handful of unknowns that I thought needed to be addressed, and I thought needed to go in Oklahoma State's favor in order for them to win, in order for them to be this dominant, right? Victor Shisama had been struggling this year. He was 45th at the Big 12 championships. 45th. This guy's a 3-time All-American, and he was 45th. And yeah, sorry if I was a little cautious and saying, hey, I'm not sure if he's going to be an All-American. And I think he kind of has to be. Well, I don't know if you guys saw, but he was 12th. So not only was he an All-American for the 4th time, he was convincingly the best he's ever been. I don't say I've never, but there are very few men who are not the focal scorers of their lineups that are as consistently great on the national stage as someone like Shisama is. I can't remember someone being a 4-time All-American and not really being like the main focal name of their lineup. It's a very odd and like fascinating dynamic. The other aspect that I didn't know about this was Brian Masao, Dennis Kipnigich, freshmen from Kenya. They clearly had tons of raw talent, but we've had these moments before where Kenyan youngsters who are supremely talented come to the NCAA and they don't as easily adjust to the tactics, to the large pack running, to whatever it may be. Sometimes they do, for sure, but not all the time. Masao had looked great this year. He ended up at 8th on Saturday. Awesome. Kipnigich, however, was 14th at Big 12 championships. Yes, he won the Midwest regional title. Sorry, I'm just not putting any stock into that. I don't put any stock into the regional meets, at least not for the top teams. So 14th at the Big 12 championships was really the only thing I had. He had won the Cowboy Jamboree. Yes, he beat Devin Hard and the whole Texas crew and a few other key Oklahoma State guys. But again, it was a rust buster, a small field. It was hard to pull a lot of insight from that. And so it was fair to say, what are we going to expect from Dennis Kipnigich? He was 4th. And that was the difference. With both Shisama and Kipnigich being as good as they were, I mean, there was nothing Northern Arizona could do. I mean, for Northern Arizona, I mean, you break it down. Again, the scores were 49 points for Oklahoma State, 71 points for Northern Arizona. Break this down for Northern Arizona. Drew Bosley 5th, Nico Young 6th, Aaron Les Harris 18th, Santiago Prosser 21st, Brody Hasty 25th. There's nothing more that those guys could have done. There's really not. Those are pretty much spot on with expectations of saying like, hey, if you have a good day, you guys can all do this. Now, sure, maybe Bosley and Young could have been in contention to go 1-2 or 2-3. And sure, maybe Les Harris could have been 3 spots higher. And sure, maybe Prosser showed last year that he was 19th, I think. He was 21st this year. Okay, sure, maybe he could have been 2 spots higher. Has Hasty ever been this good? 25th? Where was he last year? He was 25th. So he was pretty much spot on. When you start adding up all those what if, could they have been, those little ticky-tack, yeah, then you start, when you throw in displacement, then the scores get a little bit more interesting. But, I mean, you're asking 4 to 5 different men of this top 5 to just, hey, can you all run just a little bit faster? Can you all just run a little bit better? Which is a little bit ridiculous because they still ran really well. They were still great. And so I don't know what you do if you're Northern Arizona. You just have to, I think, shrug your shoulders, applaud them, and just kind of move on. So, great race from Oklahoma State. They were just better. Dave Smith had primed this squad, and they were as dangerous as I think some people thought they could be. I didn't think they would be this dangerous. I didn't think they'd be this dangerous. But shout out to both teams. great race. Interesting dynamic now. By the way, before I move on, think about this. What has been the better rivalry? Has it been Northern Arizona versus BYU? Or has it been Northern Arizona versus Oklahoma State? Now, I think some of you will instantly go, Garrett, I mean, Northern Arizona, BYU for sure. But Northern Arizona was pretty much the better team throughout most of those seasons and pretty much all those national meets. Yes, BYU did beat Northern Arizona. I want to say, back in 2019, was it? Yes, that did happen. But even then, Northern Arizona was the better team that fall. So something to consider, because now Oklahoma State has a head-to-head rivalry with Northern Arizona where they're 1-1. Last year, they tied for the national title. Northern Arizona got the win. This year, they both ran great races, except Oklahoma State just had all of their uncertainties go into their favor, and they dominated. They got the win, and Northern Arizona still ran well. And again, they're the clear top two teams. So if we get to a point next year where these two teams are battling it out again for the national title, maybe this is the best rivalry. It's something to consider. All right, moving to the individual title race here, Graham Blanks. I mean, I think we said in our preview in the podcast, we were like, well, is he the national title favorite? And as it turns out, yeah, he should have been. And listen, do I think there's validity to this idea that other men like Hapham, Samuel Kaleda, Kai Robinson, Dennis Kipnagich, Drew Bosley, Nico Young, I think Brian Massell, maybe you could throw in Parker Wolf in there if you really wanted to. Maybe the same thing you could say with Alex Mayer. You kind of go through this. Maybe there's another name that I'm just not thinking about. You kind of go through this and you go, yeah, I can see avenues where they could have won, but Blanks had the better resume. He had the biggest win. He ended it undefeated. And he says on the pod, he says like in the post-race interviews that he, quote unquote, what was the quote? It was, I ran like a dumbass, was what he said. And I was like, really? I was like, this is why you go to Harvard and I sat at a desk. I was like, you did? Because I don't know how many dumbasses could make poor moves and then still win the national title over a guy who runs 27:20 for 10,000 meters. Now, he's hinting at saying that a lot of different moves were made and he covered all of them. And that's why. But I think what we're missing here is that a bunch of different moves were made, and with each different move being made, the pack got thin and got thin. It got thinner. I mean, it's not like he was, it's not like he made the move and then someone didn't drop. At least not from my perspective. That's not how I viewed the race. I thought it was just a good race, point blank period. He just stayed in contention. And I just thought he was, able to execute extremely well over that last, 800 meters. I thought that was extremely well done. As for everyone else, I mean, it's, again, you kind of shrug your shoulders that you could have picked anyone, but none of these results are really all that surprising among the top six. Patrick Kiprop in seventh is pretty good. Thought this could have been the year where Nico Young could have had that national title. Not quite, but also, again, like I thought he could have finished first. I thought he could have finished sixth or seventh or eighth. It's just one of those years. And same thing with Drew Bosley. So, okay, that's all my initial thoughts. I know that was probably not the most clean monologue there, but no matter. Appreciate you all for staying with me here. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to move over to Donny or Mara. I haven't decided which one I'm going to splice in next. and we'll go from there. We'll wrap up the podcast with those two guests. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am now joined by one of our newer contributors. You kind of see him all over the place. He's with the high school side. He's on the JUCO end. He'll occasionally contribute to maybe just some D1, D2, D3 articles, predictions. And he was also at the NCAA D1 cross country championships. He was getting post race interviews. He was fielding, looking out and scouting. It's Donny Spees. Donny, thank you for joining.
What's up, y'all? It's a pleasure to be on the podcast. I listened to it even before I was a writer here, and it's really cool to be on it.
Awesome. Yeah, first time on the podcast. You're actually one of two guests we're going to have today. Mara's also joining as well this week. So Donny, what I need from you is a little different than what I need from Mara. What I'm looking for today is I want to know more about what you saw, how things unfolded, not so much about the analysis part. And so I kind of want you to walk me through a few key aspects and key topics here. One of them being Caitlin Tuohy. Can you talk to me about what did you see from her during the race? How did she look? It seems like she was dealing with some illness. Is there a certain point in the race where you could see like, she's just not going to, go for it, kind of like we all saw from the moment? Like, what did you see on the moment that maybe we couldn't see on TV?
Well, really, what kind of struck out to me, the first thing is at Nuttycombe, we saw Tuohy and Valby, they went at it. Tuohy took Valby's bait at Nuttycombe, and we've seen it not play out that way before at last year's Nationals. And I expected Tuohy to go out with Valby. She kind of hinted a little bit towards the press conference, but I'm sitting there maybe 600 meters in, and I see Valby's already got a bit of a gap, not much, but Tuohy's a bit back there. She's in the chase pack. Then they're coming around, I want to say 3K. Valby's already got 15, 20 seconds on the field, and Tuohy is nowhere near there. And that's when we really start thinking, hey, is she going to be able to make this? She's going to be able to make this move. And then the next point I see her, maybe 4.5K, I couldn't tell you exactly. She had definitely slowed down. She was a bit back there, but she was able to, from the looks of it, she clawed back up. But really what was the biggest teller for how Caitlin Tuohy was feeling was what happened post-race. So we're in the mix zone, right? I'm getting interviews and the athletes come through, and I'm looking out for Tuohy, obviously, and I still don't see her. And then when her coach comes through, she tells us Tuohy is feeling a bit sick. I was a bit shocked by that. At the press conference on Friday, Tuohy seemed great. She seemed perfectly fine. This came out of nowhere for us. And then, I don't know what it was, 45 minutes to an hour afterwards, I'm going around getting some more interviews, and I see Tuohy. And try to talk to her, but she is in very bad shape, as in she could not stand up by herself. She was leaning on a teammate. Like, it was very rough, and it gave me a lot of, I'm not sure what respect. Even I didn't know if I could respect Caitlin Tuohy even more, but I found a way to.
Wow.
She was down for the count, and what she did on Saturday was very impressive. I can't put it into words.
That is a great, that's just something that you don't hear. It's like, man, it's like, okay, something's wrong. And then you come back. It's like, okay, well, maybe she just has to get over the race real quick, but it's 45 minutes. It's 30 minutes later, and she's still clearly struggling. And to think that she still held on despite being that ill is so impressive.
And one more thing I want to add on that. So one of the questions that was asked at the press conference was like something along like, what makes it worth it? Something like that. And Tuohy said she loves when younger girls come like, hey, you inspire me. And they ask for pictures and all that stuff, right? I saw Tuohy had to say no to two very young girls that seemed to be wanting to get a picture with her. And it seemed to break her heart, but she was just, I can't even keep on adding on about this. It was just, she was down for the count.
Yeah, that's super impressive. She's always been just noting off of that, she's been like the perfect superstar. She's been like from day one, been a good role model for all these young athletes growing up. She's been very respectful, dominant, of course, always available for media availability, usually at least. She's been the dominant superstar. And so for her to have such a tough day and to still emerge on top, I think just kind of goes to show like how challenging that day was and how impressive it was. Staying more on the NC State topic, obviously NC State NAU, an incredibly close title race there. NC State gets the 1 point edge on NAU. clearly there must have been a lot of tension, I imagine, in the mixed zone after the race when people are crossing the line. Can you kind of give me an idea of what it was like? I don't know if you how close you were to NC State or to NAU. Could you read faces? What were just some of the motions? Can you talk about the tension? And then more specifically after that, the moment of okay, these are the results are now final. The emotion, the elation, the joy from NC State. I don't really know. Maybe NAU is probably still happy with second place. I don't know. Can you just kind of talk about some of the reactions of that performance?
Well, at first they weren't heading towards the mix zone. They knew the results were still up in the air. They kind of all staying in there. There was a real big tent, and then the mix zone was the exit to that, right? They were all in the really big tent. They weren't spending too much time where we could be in a position to read their faces. And I think I got over there with the moment I saw Valby across the finish line, that's when I got into the mix zone. So I wasn't there for the big scoreboard when they were calculating on the team scores, but we were all crowding around. There was service out there was terrible, as you can imagine.
Right.
So one person had service. We were all just crowding around their phone, but it just, you could hear just the gasps of just shock more than anything else, not even an emotion one way or the other on both sides. They were both just in shock of what happened. And that seemed to be the biggest theme when the NC State, when Coach Lorridge, when she came out and she talked to us, in that she admitted, that's what she said herself, that she was just shocked on what happened. But it was definitely, it took a while for it to set in, but afterwards I saw Kelsey Camille, and she was over the world with just overwhelmed by such joyous emotions. And I feel like everyone that was, all the NC State girls, they were on top of the world. And the environment was just very pro NC State there. I saw a whole lot of red. I sat next to a guy on the bus who ran for them back in the 90s. I saw so many different NC State t-shirts. People had paint on their chests. Even it felt like a college football game out there. It was a real good day for NC State, and the environment definitely showed that.
Yeah, and in defense of NAU, the national meet wasn't exactly close to them proximity wise.
Yeah, no, very few people were making the trip out from Flagstaff.
Right, right. Well, that is interesting. And okay, so I'll move off of that a little bit. Let's talk about the men's race. Let's talk again. We'll start with the individual aspect here. Crazy race ish. It just seemed like there were 1,000 different men in contention to win at certain points. Again, what can you tell us about this race that we might not have seen on TV? Were there different points that you noticed that you said that is the point where someone should have made a move, where they did make a move? Were there defining points in there that said it was these 2 or 3 moves that kind of defined the race? And by reading some of the athletes' faces, kind of what can you kind of tell me about that individual title?
Well, a lot of it was, I feel like Graham Blank said it perfectly. There was a whole lot of moves. I covered every one. I probably shouldn't have. And there was just so many different moves. And by the time, really, the first few K, everyone was up in there. And then give or take 4 or 5K, I don't remember which split exactly, they were coming past, and it was down to a group of 5. And you're like, okay, you kind of get an idea of, you know who it's going to be. It was Blanks, Samuel was in there. I may have been 4 actually, and the 2 guys from the top 2 from Oklahoma State.
And Kai Robinson, right? No.
Kai Robinson, thank you. That's the guy I was forgetting. They were all up in that pack, and you knew it was going to come down to those guys. They kind of just baited at each other, poking and prodding, nothing too significant. And then I'd say about 800 meters left, that's when Graham Blanks really started to take off. There was a bit of a downhill stretch, and he just expanded the lead and just keep on going. He used the course to his momentum. For those of you unaware, the finish in Charlottesville, it's a big downhill followed by a quick turn, and then you got about 150 meters uphill to the finish. And he just used the downhills to his advantage. And I think Hopperton Samuel, with about 50 meters, 150 meters so left, he almost threw in the towel. And that's not drop off, obviously, but you could see he took the sunglasses off of his head. And that's like, he kind of conceded a bit there. And Graham Blanks, he was loving it. Everyone, the whole crowd was in it there. I feel like everyone wanted to see the kid who's not on scholarship, but it's an Ivy Leaguer. That's hasn't happened since never on the men's side.
I was just saying never. I don't think never.
Yeah, never on the men's side at least. And the whole crowd was loving it. Graham Blanks was clearly very happy. There was a lot of Harvard guys there too. And when he got out of the mix zone, it felt like he was coming down the finish chute again. It was just this whole roar or just erupted from this huge chunk of Harvard guys.
In terms of those final moments, you kind of referenced a little bit of how about them Samuel Kaleda. There seemed to be a moment where, again, they go down that hill, Blanks kind of runs down it, and I think Robinson kind of follows, and they kind of go like side by side, stride by side, and then Kaleda is like a bit, he's not gone, but he's a little bit further back, and then Kaleda eventually comes up, is somehow able to cover the gap, stick with Graham Blanks until the final moments when Blanks is able to pull away ultimately. I don't know if you saw that move, and if not, totally fine. But if you remember anything about that move, how confident were you that Kaleda was going to be able to cover it?
I mean, we've heard all these things about Kaleda. Was world junior everything, right? He comes in with a 27-20, 10K PR. He's one of the world's best, right? And then, but I don't know. I didn't think he could do it after what I think he could have caught back up, but I feel like Graham Blanks had more in him. Okay. With what we've seen of him, he ran a 13.27, what was supposed to be his freshman year in college. He's just as talented, and he's run NCAA XC championships before, finishing 6th last year. I feel like this was Graham Blanks. Once Graham Blanks makes that move with 800 meters left, it was all him. I don't feel like anyone else had a chance after that.
Okay. Moving to the men's in the team race, and you, based on some of the interviews that you gave, they seemed like pretty okay that they had gotten second, and I kind of get it because they scored 71 points and still couldn't, and they still couldn't win, and so I guess I can't really blame them there. But again, one of those things, the mixed zone, exchange zone, it feels pretty clear that you knew who won pretty instantly once all those guys crossed the line. I don't know. You spoke to Dave Smith.
I did. Yes.
What was the energy? And you spoke to, or no, I'm thinking Andrew. Yeah. What was the energy? No, you did speak to Fouad, right?
Yeah, I spoke to Fouad. I spoke to Andrew on Oklahoma State's. On the Oklahoma State side, I spoke to those guys, and then on the NAU side, I spoke to Nico, Andrew.
Right. Okay. Just generally, what was some of the energy? Like, what was the energy? What was the vibe? Obviously, Oklahoma State probably pretty elated, but just tell me about some of those reactions.
Fouad was all smiles. We got into the mix zone, and like you said, you knew who won it. You didn't have to check the scores. You just see, wait, there's 2, and there's 3, 4, 5, all right there. All just it was a sea of orange out there, and he knew that. He was all smiles when he was at that interview. He was jumping up and down. He's got teammates and support staff that are running up right by the fence by the mix zone, just shouting in, just trying to congratulate everyone. And they were all smiles. And Coach Smith, he was a lot more, I don't want to say professional but I would say, he wasn't showing as much emotion, but you could tell that he was very happy about that with both how his men's and women's teams did. I mean, it's not often you see like their average finish was second, and with one of the most historic performances on the men's side with a team score of 48, they seemed very happy about. I mean, I don't know what more to say about that, but NAU at first, because if you saw, I got 2 interviews with NAU. I got Nico and I got Drew. I got Nico first. As you can see, he's still in a singlet when I got him. He seemed a lot more down, but after the time Warren went on, it took some time to sink in. They realized, hey, we still scored 71 points. When I got around to getting to Drew after the award ceremony, he seemed great. He seemed happy, content with how he finished, with how the team finished, and that seemed to be the vibe from everyone else that was off camera there. They all seemed pretty content after they took some time for it to sink in and look at the results and give some context to it.
Yeah, I mean, the Bosley interview was, I think, very telling, where he goes, no, like, I'm sincerely, I'm not lying. I really am happy about how we ran today. And I can't blame him. 71 points.
That's a real good score.
It's a really, really, really good score. And then just Oklahoma State had a historic performance. So wrapping up here, kind of as we get to the tail end of just some insights here, what's one takeaway, whether from the interviews that you had, whether just from your time on the course, whether it's the press conference, what's one thing that you maybe took away from this past weekend that we may not have been able to see on TV or see from some of the previews or see along anything along those lines? Is there anything in particular?
I got a couple things for you.
Okay.
Uh, Oklahoma State, they're going to be. It was even more dominant than it looks on paper. It was never a question. After about maybe 1K in, you knew who was going to be winning that race. And the other thing, UVA needs to host this meet again. They did a phenomenal job. The course, I think I saw something online, 6,700 spectators there.
Yep.
That is, granted, they don't quantify that a lot, but getting that many people for a cross-country meet, putting it in an area, the most populated region of the country, you can get people from all over the country that are up from the New York City area. That's not too far of a drive. Up from Florida, it's not too far of a drive. NC State had a huge contingent there. Having it there, the course is very good. It's a true cross-country course there, but it's still spectator-friendly. And it was the most fun cross-country meet that I had ever been a part of, that I've ever witnessed. And I think they need to host it again.
Staying on the course, you've actually gone through the West Coast, now you're on the East Coast as well, going to school. You've run on a handful of different courses.
I've raced in Ohio, Tennessee, Utah, Arizona, Kentucky, Colorado, Utah, California, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania.
I don't know how you could recall all of that quickly, but
Basic one.
Yeah. And so I want to know, you have a ton of experience, and I already knew that ahead of time, with a bunch of different courses, a bunch of different venues. Is the Virginia course maybe as hilly or possibly as challenging as maybe some people have said it is?
I mean, naturally, things always get blown up when they talk about it online. They blow things out of proportion. It makes for better stories, right? But this one, it's legit. It's very hilly. And what separates this from a course like out in Stillwater is that the footing and the way the grass is cut is a whole lot different. It's a whole lot more old school style. It doesn't feel like a golf course. It feels like you're running through the woods. It's maybe not that bad, but you can kind of see what I'm saying. The footing isn't great. The turns are a lot more sharp. It's definitely an old school course, but I feel like a lot of the athletes liked that. I mean, especially the men from Oklahoma State, but everyone seemed to like it, and that seemed to be a bit of the consensus. Even Parker Valby, she commented that this was harder than Stillwater. So, yeah, I hope that's got what you were getting at there.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly what we were looking for. I think, for anyone who hasn't gone there, I mean, this is a stage that has held the ACC championships last year, and it, has the national meet this year. So, yeah, no, I'm glad you did. But Donny, great job. First time. You killed it on the pod. You're doing well.
Appreciate it. Hey, hopefully with high school nationals come up in a couple of weeks, I'd love to get back on there and talk a bit about that.
Yeah, well, we'll certainly have some downtime between then. So we'll certainly have to get you back on. Well done. And thank you for all your work. All right. I am now joined by Mara Beatty, a longtime TSR veteran. And Mara, my first question for you is, what were you thinking getting football tickets on the weekend of NCAA cross-country championships?
It did not even cross my mind. I was at a concert with my mom and one of my siblings and brother-in-law, and I was like, these are great tickets to go to Notre Dame. I didn't even look at the date because it was a weekend I didn't have anything for work. And next thing I know, I'm telling Garrett that it's NCAA's weekend. I'm not giving up the tickets. It was a great price. Now, it was a good game, but I felt really bad at the end of the day.
Well, what's crazy? Listen, did I have a minor heart attack? Yes, of course I did. But you still contributed to the article, which was a miracle in and of itself. Where I was like, I'm in the car watching the stream. I've got on my phone doing the Google Docs. I was like, are you insane? But she is insane, and that's why she's here, and that's why we love her. Mara, today we're going to chat just about some of the women's teams we already spoke about earlier in the pod. Valby, NC State, some of that dynamic. So I kind of want to talk about everyone else here, and we'll start on the women's side. Let's chat about the Florida experiment. An interesting dynamic. Florida obviously starts with Parker Valby this offseason, then brings in Flomena Axicol. They bring in Amaza Downey. They bring in Thorner, Allison Wilson. Valby wins the title. Then you have Axicol having just a phenomenal race in sixth place. And let me double check to make sure I have everyone else here. And then it goes to Allison Wilson, 49th place, Elise Thorner, 75th. And then they have, their last two runners fall outside the top 200. Amelia Mazzodowney is a DNF. The fact that they had only two All-Americans and Mazzodowney was a DNF, it feels like this was still a successful season for them to place fifth. Would you agree, or do you feel like, but I still thought they should be a podium team?
I never truly saw them as a podium team. There were still a lot of questions there. Now, yeah, when they won the SEC championships a few weeks ago, it definitely like elevated them a little bit. But then losing to Tennessee at regionals kind of brought them back down to earth. And they definitely have the firepower with Valby and a sequel up front, but there were still some depth issues. But definitely fifth place was well worthy of what they were working towards this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think the fact that it was almost just like we're just going to hope that a handful of these hit, and if they do, we're just going to be good enough. And yeah, fifth, listen, it's not a podium finish, but the fact that they could have those things go wrong and still they get fifth, I think is pretty crazy impressive if you ask me. You mentioned South Region, you mentioned Tennessee. Oh my gosh, the Tennessee women, what an incredible race for them. Sixth place overall. We were, I think we were high on them in the postseason. I think you and I both. I don't think we imagined them finishing sixth overall. And the craziest part is that they didn't have an All-American. They had Ashley Jones 42nd, and then it goes down Julia Cantalino in 72nd, Rachel Sutliff in 74th, Caroline Lillery in 91st, and then they round out the top five with Jessie Sikora, a top freshman, in 113th place. Two questions here. Your first initial reaction when you saw Tennessee finish sixth in the team standings with no individual All-Americans, and then what are now the expectations for this team in 2024, given that they return a good number of these women? They're pretty young. They still continue to develop, but they also wildly outperformed at the national championships.
I think what's extremely impressive about these women right now is it's a very young team. They had 3 true freshmen in their top 5, and they had no national level experience from anybody racing there. And for them to show out like they did this weekend, like, truly shows you the impact that Sean Carlson is making in only year 2 with the Tennessee women. Now, as we head into 2024, it's still super early to start making any kind of predictions. But if they continue to grow off the way that they did this season, I mean, they could still be a top 10 team next year. There's no doubt that they don't have that ability anymore.
So I think it's fair to say that just because this team finished sixth at the national meet, I think it would be unfair to put podium expectations on them in 2024. But I agree with you that I think top 10 expectations are, just from a general power rankings hierarchy standpoint, I think a very fair spot. Ashley Jones, let's talk about her. She transferred over from High Point. She has been quietly really dangerous this season. She was 12th at pre-nationals, then 10th at SECs, 7th in the South region, and then she was 42nd at the NCAA cross-country championships. You and I argue every summer about who's going to crack the top 50 individual rankings of our preseason rankings. When it's early, we're 8 months out from it now, but is that a top 50 resume?
I would definitely say so.
Yeah.
I mean, she's in one of the toughest, she's in a Power 5 conference, and to finish 10th at the SECs is still a remarkable finish. Now, yeah, it's not top 3, but when you look at Alabama and Florida and what Arkansas brings in, but she was one of the top SEC runners this past weekend.
Let's stay in the SEC. Alabama, 7th place. Doris Lemengol, 2nd. Hilda Olamonwe, 4th. Not surprising in the slightest bit. and then I believe it was where's Joy Gill back in 53rd place, and then they have some women well outside of the top 150. I want to say, I should we have seen this coming? Because the lineup structure of this team is really not. It's not. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say outside the top 150? I might have. I might have misspoken there. Let me double check. It was.
160.
Oh, yeah, okay. They were. I was. Yeah, thank you for checking. Should we have been surprised about Alabama's 7th place team finish? Because structurally, this is not any different than I think what we were expecting.
I don't think so. I mean, when I look at last year's results, Elka Machin was 155th last year, and she was a scorer for them. Again, she was a scorer for them this season. Now, yeah, they were a little bit further back with Mackenzie Hogue, but having the 2-4 up front points wise, that's going to help you, regardless of what really happens off in the back end. That firepower up front is sometimes just too unmatched for other teams that bring in extra depth.
So yes, I agree. To me, I think the catalyst in this is Joy Gill. I think when you have a lethal top two, but it's like, okay, well, what does everyone else do? You can at least stabilize the scoring enough to say like, hey, we have another top 60 runner. I don't. She was within striking distance of All American individual honors. At least reasonably speaking. And I think to bridge those two gaps and to bring the value that she has this season and to be as consistent as she has been this season, being a sophomore, transferring into like a truly top level program, I think has been, I think she's been the difference maker. Teams though that struggle to bridge certain gaps, or at the very least, maybe didn't have all of their firepower together. BYU, tough day. I think we thought that they would be a podium team. They finished 14th. And I appreciate Coach Dilsey Taylor talking to us after the meet. And I also appreciate the transparency of just being like, listen, we just weren't prepared. We weren't ready. We were excited, and it just didn't happen. In terms of, how do I put this? Should we, is this another thing that like we have seen coming? Like Riley Chamberlain, Jenna Hutchins, Carmen Alder, we had talked about in the beginning of the year. We're like, hey, this is a pretty like still young, inexperienced team. Like this team's going to rely on like a lot of young and inexperienced women, but they had been running so well during the regular season. So I guess I'm trying to figure out is what were your expectations with this team's really good, but their inexperience is something to consider on the national stage.
I definitely think that inexperience was something to look at. Yeah, Carmen Alder had that great performance at pre-nats earlier in the season, but she really struggled this past weekend. And it was a tough day out there for the BYU women. Now, Aubrey Friendly ran amazingly.
She was great.
And that was a great performance, but I think the women just went out a little too hot and they paid for it that last 1K.
Yeah, I mean it was not it just wasn't, yeah, it wasn't great, and you're right, like they got out pretty quick, and I think were they leading at one point?
Through the 1K or through the 1K and the 2K they were leading, then they dropped to third, which is about what we would have expected them to finish.
Sure. Right.
But then they really fell off that last 1K.
Yeah. And that's, and so people, when we do our team rankings, people are just like, well, what, it's just the national meet results. It's just the national meet results. I was like, really? You think BYU women were the 14th best team in the nation this year? And I would be like, there's no way. Right. I'd be like, and that's why people are like, these end of season rankings are silly. I'm like, you can't tell me that the BYU women were the 14th best team in the country this year. And it's a similar story, actually, for the Georgetown women. Georgetown women had a very tough day. I think they were 18th here. Chloe Scrimgeour, much like Frentway, was their star lead scorer. She got 8th. She's been so good this year. She's been awesome. Maggie Donahue, veteran, held her own, wasn't quite as strong. She got 55th, though. And then no one else in the top 100. They had Kelsey Swinson hold her own, 109th place, and then 148th, 204th, 212th. Melissa Riggins, though, being the DNF there. In retrospect, even let's just assume, like even with Riggins running well, were we maybe too high on Georgetown, or were we still like, did we still have arguments and good reasons considering how well they ran at Virginia Invite and more specifically the Nuttycombe Invite?
I would say we definitely had an argument to make for them being in our top 5 rankings throughout the season. Sorry. Yeah, it was a great day for their number one runner, but it was a tough time to see Melissa Reagans record that DNF. I mean, she's a star middle distance runner for the Hoyas, and to take that to being able to bridge that between the 800 times and her 1500 to the cross country course, she was doing great all season. But it's just that one day when it matters most. So it was just a tough day for the Georgetown women, as you can't put every piece together on the right day sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, Scrimgeour ran really well, and when Riggins, you don't really realize, like, that she's impactful. I don't think we really truly realize just how impactful she is when she falls back, and like Donahue still held her own, and
Oh,
Swenson held her own. And I think maybe Gonzalez is probably looking for a bit of a better finish, but like that top three that they had, top four, it wasn't that bad. Could they have been a little bit better? Sure, but it was actually fairly solid. Um, so I'm still trying to figure out how actually, by the time we've already recorded this, or we've already done the rankings as we're recording, but I think we got it right.
well,
So I guess
here's the crazy thing. Georgetown finished sorry, not finished. We ranked them in our preseason at number 18.
did we
They
really?
they finished 18th this past weekend. So, I mean, we kind of predicted something in a sense. They just really impressed us earlier in the season, throughout the season, and it was just at the end of the day, not their day.
I agree. I agree. That's actually nice observation. Real quick, Stanford. I want to end on them. 12th place finish. I It's not what they expected. Probably they probably wanted something to top 7. I imagine we wanted that for them. But considering that they really didn't run that well, I thought they kind of salvaged a decent race in 12th place. And not only that, but there was no Irene Riggs this season. Zofia Dudek was not in top form, and Amy Bunnage again at the national meet was fell off of like her one off day. Do you still see this team as a podium favorite or even podium threat? Let's say podium favorite because they're going to get another year older. Do you still see them as a podium favorite in 2024?
I would say so. What's impressive about this Stanford team is they only had a split of 1 to 5 of 33 seconds. That's a really solid time for a team that looks like they're going to return everybody next season.
Mm-hmm.
1 year older, hopefully bringing back in Irene Riggs if she's healthy, and it could be a game changing for them.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, nice observation there. The time of spread. That's basically, I think, how they salvaged a 12th place finish, despite no one really being in that top 50 individually. Let's move on to the men. We already spoke about again earlier in the pod the top teams there, but I want to start with the Iowa State men. Oh my gosh, the Iowa State men were at one point not even ranked in our rankings, and it was already in the postseason. This is a team that was, gosh, they had finished fourth, fourth at the Big 12 XC Championships, and they were well behind the likes of Texas, BYU, Oklahoma State, and yet they got fifth with 230 points. They were, I think, 19 points out from Arkansas. I don't even know like where to begin here with this team. Sanel Masando in 16th place came out of absolutely nowhere, the former JUCO product. Stunning performance from him. And Rogers Cablimo never saw that he was going to be an All-American this season. Gabel Pierda, probably his best race of the season. He had shown that he could do something similar like that before. Saeed McHale, 55th place, not his best race, probably his worst race of the season, yet he still provides great value. And then their fifth runner goes back in 121st place. One, on a scale of 1 to 10, how surprised were you? And then two, how do I want to put this? How did we misrank, or how did we misanalyze? Why were we so low on Iowa State? And is this something that we should have seen coming? Is there anything that we could have seen that would have suggested, okay, maybe they'll at least be top 15 or top 10?
So is 10 like the most surprised?
Yeah, to be most
Yeah, we're
surprised.
seeing 11 then. I didn't know where that race came from. Now I don't participate in the men's rankings unless you're kind of torn between some teams.
Yeah.
It's a little hard to say that, like, did we miss something? Because I'm more focused on the women's rankings. But this is a team that didn't even qualify for NCAAs last year.
Mm-hmm.
And they come up and are just outside of the podium by 19 points. That was a great finish that they put together to have, what was it? They had 4 men in the top 55.
Yeah.
That was great. Now, if their number 5 runner had just finished a little bit higher in the top 100, or if someone else in the top 4 had made their way up, who knows what kind of race the Cyclones would have had this past weekend.
Yeah, what's crazy is that Saeed McKell had his worst. He was the only bright spot of this team, really, this season. He was the solo stick. He was the reason why they stayed somewhat competitive. Like everyone else, like Sanel Masando, again, 16th place. He had not shown anything remotely close to being a 16th place finisher. Here was his resume. He was 104th at the Virginia Invite. He was 80th at Nuttycombe. He was 27th at the Big 12 Championships and 7th at the Midwest Regional Meet, 16th. Maybe the boost up to 10K is what ultimately made the difference there. I don't know where we could have looked at in the results and been like, no, there's an avenue for them to be better. It was one of the most stunning performances I've seen in terms of beating the expectations at the national meet. Arkansas, can you just give me a little kudos, because Ben won't, and I was like, I don't think it's crazy that they could be like maybe a podium. I'm not predicting it, but maybe they could be a podium team. And he's like, no. Well, they finished 4th. Again, I didn't predict it because I'm not that brave. But could you have seen the avenue? When you're having this honest self-reflection, were you on my side, or were you like, no, I'm with Ben?
I'm going to go with Ben on this one.
Okay.
Some of these other teams that were just had not their best days were teams I would have seen more ahead of Arkansas. But I got to give kudos to the Arkansas men for having only 5 men finish that race and they make the podium.
Yeah.
That is crazy because you rely on that 6 and 7 runner in case someone has a bad day. They needed everybody in those remaining 5 to finish that race. And
Great
men
point.
delivered for them.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, and that's the craziest part. Like the fact that we said, if we had said, hey, Arkansas is going to have Elijah Scremmel DNF. In fact, they're only going to have 5 men cross the line. Even I would have been like, okay, well, no, they're not going to be on the podium. But, when you have the firepower of Kiprop in 7th place, Yego in 13th place, for me, that's ultimately what I think did it. It was like, we knew those guys were good. They were in like around the 20th range. I don't think we saw them hovering around the top 10 range. So that was, I think, the biggest takeaway from that team there, as well as Brendan Shearer having kind of the breakout season that he has. So that was huge for them. As I kind of go down this list, North Carolina, not a podium finish, a good season, a great season, really. Not quite there. Texas, 7th. Where did we rank Texas this season? Do you know?
Again, I don't do men's rankings, so it's a little bit harder for me to
I know.
thin air. I can tell you women's left and right.
That's true.
The
I don't remember. But I thought it was pretty close. I thought we did something pretty close to that. Stanford 8th rebound, Syracuse 9th, Wisconsin 10th. Tough day. How do I put this? The Stanford men had a poor regular season. They rallied in the postseason, but they really didn't face any like strong, legitimate competition until they got to the national meet, where they finished 8th. Are we willing to say that this season was a success for them, despite coming into the season ranked at 4th, being a podium contender? Struggle early, rebound to finish 8th. Are we willing to say like this was a successful season?
I'm gonna say no. 20th at Nuttycombe earlier in this year did not help their resume because Nuttycombe, now it's not the national meet, but it is very close to the national meet. And yeah, it's still mid-season, but they definitely rebounded well, but there's just something that they were missing all season compared to past years of what Stanford has done.
I'll say this. I don't think I've seen a team salvage a season as well as they have. I mean, we were like, I don't even know if they're going to be in the rankings by the postseason. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when you consider like how poor the Pac-12 was this year, you're like, okay, that's a great win, but none of those teams, Oregon and Washington didn't qualify for the national meet, and Colorado, they fell to 25th. So it was hard to like really be too excited about the Pac-12 win. I thought they salvaged a nice season though. Kai Robinson was consistently great this fall. He was awesome. And then you kind of go down the list and you look at everyone else. Robert DiDonato, who was one of the biggest names where I'm like, dude, you have to run well, turned into one of the most reliable guys. Lex Young ran well. He was 74th. Cole Sprout was not perfect, but top 100 cracked it. And then Evan Burke, 129th. There's at least avenues, I think, for future growth there. I thought they salvaged it well. So I agree with you. I'm not ready to say that the season was a success just given what the initial expectations were, but do I think they salvaged it better than any other team? Yeah, I do. Montana State, let's chat about them. This team needed a miracle, not a miracle, but they needed a great race at the Mountain Region championships to get in. They beat Colorado. They get pushed into the national meet. This is a team that was, I think, like 9th, 8th. I forget. At Joe Piani, they had been really poor. They were slightly rebounded, and as the season progressed, but they had not suggested that they were going to be a ranked team at all. Well, they finished 13th place. They had Matthew Rickman again coming through with another monster All-American performance, despite his regular season not suggesting that. He finishes 26 overall. Ben Perrin, the veteran, 53rd. Owen Smith, 72nd. Levi Taylor, 138th. Rob McManus, 165th. There are two ways of looking at this. I think when you look at Montana State, you can say, okay, you can see that there's talent there. You can see that we know Rickman was an All-American. We know Perrin is reliable, right? We know Owen Smith's improving, and McManus is pretty good in the steeplechase, even if he wasn't a top scorer for this team. And yet, their regular season results never suggested that they would finish 13th. I guess in terms of how surprised we should be, like where would you rank how surprised we should be? Not that you are.
Well, I would say, it is an experienced team in a sense.
It's true.
There's a lot of juniors. You got some seniors up there, and they did. Now, I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know who all competed last year at NCAA's when they finished 25th, and they lost Duncan Hamilton, so they're low stick. But I don't know. I'm gonna say maybe like around that 5-6 surprise.
Okay.
I really got to give it to Matthew Rickman though. I remember him racing in high school because he's from well around the area where I'm currently live. He's like his high school's about 15 minutes away from me. But I just remember him going to Bradley University was about as expected. A lot of guys were going there, but since he's gone to Montana State, he's really elevated his game.
Yeah, he was great. I mean, again, he's one of those guys where it's just like national meet hits, he's a different guy. And it's pretty impressive. That's what ultimately leads to Montana State finishing 13th overall. I'm looking at the 2022 results. There we go. They still finished 13th overall. Don't be mistaken there. All right, kind of wrapping up towards the end here. I can't say I'm too surprised about a whole lot else here. NC State, 17th place, coming back, salvaging a good result after a tough kind of earlier season. Virginia, 22nd on their home course, a bit of a tough day. This is still, in some sense, like a young team. Um, were we maybe, is it understandable that maybe they didn't have their best day falling back to 22nd, given
I
that
would
they were still young?
I would say, yeah, Gary Martin, who's been up there and they're scoring 5, he dropped all the way down to 219th. It's definitely a team that's still trying to find their groove together, and it's just going to take like another year or so for them to really start moving higher up.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's what we projected this team to be this year. And I think we were probably a year ahead of time. We're like, oh, the national meets on their home course. And, I think at some point or another, you can run on your home course, but it's one thing to run on your home course, and then it's another thing to run on your home course with 250 people. You know what I mean? So I think that's probably something that we maybe misgauged. I still think they were better than 22nd in the country this year. But there were some moments where I go, I think that's just an inexperienced thing. So I think that gets cleaned up over time. What one performance that we haven't spoken about yet do you want to highlight, that like you were looking at these results and you go, oh, I kind of like this performance for whatever reason?
You're looking for team or
Team,
individual?
team,
Team?
sure.
Um, you know,
You don't have to have an answer.
I don't really have a team. I mean, everybody about finished. Air Force, I will say 12th place. Yeah, they finished really well earlier in the season at Nuttycombe, but considering how much firepower they lost, to finish 12th in the nation this year is a strong showing for them.
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree. I'd agree. Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I'm kind of looking at these teams. Like I don't think it's too surprising. So, all right, Mara, I think that's it. I appreciate you joining us and giving all the analysis. Um, we're going to wrap up team rankings. We're going to wrap up individual rankings. We're going to do end of season awards. And then you, Mara Beatty, get a week or two rest before indoor track rankings and before we go back to the grind. But thank you for all your work this season and nice job.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Awesome.